Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where clay is louder than thunder, where a fingertip pressed into wet earth can outlive empires, and where the night sky feels like it has something on its mind. You are standing in a dim room that smells faintly of dust and old stone, the kind of place where sound goes soft, as if even your footsteps are trying not to wake the past. In your hands is a small clay tablet, not much bigger than a paperback, yet it carries a whole weather system of meaning. Some parts of what you are about to hear are widely accepted history. Some parts are interpretation, and some parts are calm what-if imagination. We will keep the solid ground separate from the mist. We are not proving anything tonight. We are following clues, and if the evidence is thin, we will say so. Also, you probably won't survive this. Not in the dramatic way. Relax. But in the sense that your attention span may not survive the amount of ancient weirdness we are about to calmly stroll through like it is perfectly normal to discuss cosmic battles on a bedtime channel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you are listening from and what your local time is. Because I love imagining all of us scattered across the planet like little lanterns. Half awake, half dreaming. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tilt the tablet toward the lamplight, and the tiny wedge marks catch a shadow. Then another, like miniature mountain ranges. What's broadly accepted is that the people of ancient Sumer developed one of the earliest writing systems we know. Cuneiform, pressed into clay with a reed stylus. Most historians agree that these tablets record practical things like grain rations, land sales, lists of workers, temple inventories, and taxes that make your modern paperwork look fun. But they also write prayers, hymns, king lists, and stories about gods, storms, and the ways the world can crack when it gets angry. You take a slow breath and imagine the tablet before it is old. It is warm and damp, fresh from the river bank. A scribe sits cross-legged, posture careful, like someone balancing an invisible bowl on his head. His reed stylus is trimmed at an angle. He presses, lift, press, lift. Each mark is a choice. Each line is a tiny path through time. The evidence we do have points to something important. These people are not writing because they are bored. They write because society is getting complicated. Cities are swelling, temple economies are humming, and somebody needs to remember who owes what, who delivered barley, who got a ration, who shorted the count. Writing is a tool, a lever. But tools tend to pick up extra uses. You invent writing for accounting, and then, like a cat that suddenly realizes it can open doors, writing starts doing everything. And so you find tablets that speak like they are, watching the sky, not in the modern scientific way, with charts and models and calm certainty, but in an anxious human way. Like someone peering upward and trying to read mood in the clouds. Omen text, for example, are broadly accepted as a major genre in Mesopotamian culture, especially in later periods, and their roots reach deep. A strange halo around the moon, a red streak at dawn, a storm that arrives out of season, a birth with an unusual sign. These things are not just curiosities. They are messages, or at least they are treated like messages. Now you bring your attention to the word that keeps floating through modern conversations like a ghost that learned how to trend online: Anunnaki. Most historians agree that in Sumerian and later Mesopotamian traditions, the Anunnaki are divine figures, often described as a group of gods associated in various ways with authority, destiny, and sometimes the underworld. What's broadly accepted is that names and roles can shift across time and across languages. Because Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian. All of these layers mix and remix the divine cast like a long-running TV series where the writers keep changing. One interpretation is that Anunnaki is less a single fixed set of characters and more a category, a council, a way of saying the big ones, the ones with weight. And when modern storytellers say Anunnaki war, they are often blending several things together. Myths of divine conflict, tales of gods battling monsters, stories of kings fighting under divine banners, and the very human habit of turning disaster into narrative. So you keep your hand steady and your mind gentle. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, some are imagined. The tablet does not glow. It does not unlock a secret map. It is simply clay with marks. But marks can be doors. You picture an ancient night in a city like Uruk, where mudbrick walls hold the day's heat and release it slowly. So the air is warm even after sunset. There are torches, oil lamps, and the murmur of people settling down. Somewhere a dog decides to be dramatic for no reason, because dogs have been doing that for thousands of years and they are not about to stop now. Above the rooftops, the sky is enormous. The stars are sharper than you are used to, because there are no streetlights, no neon signs, no glowing screens. The Milky Way is not a concept. It is a river of pale dust, and you can understand, just a little, why the sky becomes a story. A careful reading might suggest that when ancient texts describe battles among gods, they may be encoding real experiences, political rivalry, drought, famine, invasion, the collapse of a dynasty, the trauma of a flood. One interpretation is that myth is the language of pressure. When the world shakes, people look for a shape to put around the shaking. But what if, just for a moment, you let the story breathe in the other direction? Not as a conclusion, not as a claim, but as a mood. What if the sky feels damaged? Not in the literal sense of a torn atmosphere or a broken planet, because that is a big statement and the evidence for that kind of event is not sitting neatly in the cuneiform record. Let me rephrase that more carefully. That is a possibility, not a certainty. What you can say more safely is this. Ancient people described the sky as active, alive with omens, bright with strange light, noisy with storm gods, tense with divine decisions. They describe a world where heaven and earth can clash in story, and some modern listeners hear those descriptions and wonder, could the ancients be remembering something more physical, a violent event, a catastrophe, a comet, a meteor, a massive eruption, a chain of disasters? This theory isn't widely accepted, but it is a popular rumor in internet circles. The idea that divine wars in Mesopotamian texts are garbled memories of advanced weapons or cosmic impacts. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes less of a claim and more of a question. Why do certain images repeat? Fire from the sky, a radiance, a roar, a wind that flattens, a darkness that follows. Now, mainstream history gives you plenty of grounded ways to understand those images. Storms in Mesopotamia can be brutal. Floods can erase a season's work overnight. Drought can turn a green field into a cracked plate. And when you live close to the limits of irrigation and harvest, the world's mood is not a metaphor. It is your pantry. Archaeology suggests that river behavior changes, that canals silt up, that salinity can rise in soils under heavy irrigation, stressing crops. The evidence we do have points to environmental pressures that can feel like the land itself is exhausted. So when a text speaks of an angry god scorching fields, A more cautious explanation could be that people are describing heat, drought, and failing yields in the language they have. Still, you are here for the soft shiver, the puzzle, the open question, so you step closer to the imagined scribe again. He is not writing for you. He is writing for his temple, his city, his king, his descendants, his gods. He writes because words make order. He writes because if you name the threat, maybe it becomes manageable. He writes about a conflict in the divine realm, and in that conflict, the earth suffers. Maybe it is a god of storm and war, a figure like Ninurta in later tradition, battling something chaotic, a monstrous force that hoards power. Maybe it is a goddess like Inanna, fierce and brilliant, moving through domains that do not politely belong to her, because polite is not really her brand. Maybe it is a council of gods, an argument that turns into consequences. One interpretation is that these divine stories mirror the politics of cities. Patron deities represent communities. When cities compete, their gods compete. When a king wins, it is because the god favored him. When the walls fall, it is because the god left, or was offended, or was overruled by a darker council. And yet, what if the story is pointing at something else? What if war is not only armies and spears, but a clash of forces, water and wind, heat and salt, growth and decay? The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. You can confirm the rivers exist. You can confirm the canals. You can confirm the mudbrick. You can confirm the writing. You cannot confirm an ancient superweapon. You cannot confirm a cosmic battle as a historical event. But you can confirm that people felt as if the world could be damaged by powers beyond their control. You run your thumb near the edge of the tablet, careful not to touch the surface too much, because conservators would appear out of nowhere like ninjas with polite smiles. You imagine how the tablet travels through time, baked hard by accident in a fire, or deliberately fired for permanence, then buried, then forgotten, then found by someone digging a trench who has no idea they are holding a voice. There is a quiet joke here. By the way, you spend your whole life writing, "This is important," and then you get buried for 3,000 years. And eventually a modern person picks you up and says, "Huh, neat," and then goes back to checking their notifications. Humanity is consistent. That is almost comforting. Now you let your mind follow the thread. Earth damaged by a war among the Anunnaki. As modern retellings like to phrase it, documented ground first. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian literature includes themes of divine conflict and cosmic order. They tell stories where chaos threatens structure, where gods compete, where decisions in heaven affect crops and kings on earth. The evidence we do have points to a worldview where the boundary between nature and divine will is porous. That is mainstream enough to stand on. Then, interpretation. One interpretation is that damage language is a way to talk about trauma, famine, displacement, or the collapse of a city's sense of safety. A careful reading might suggest that when a text says the land was laid waste, it may be describing a real event, a war, a siege, a scorched field, but magnified into cosmic scale because that is how it feels to the people living through it. And then the cinematic mist. What if the sky itself remembers? Not literally. Not as a scientific claim, but as a bedtime image. You stand on a rooftop in Uruk, and the stars look like chips in dark glass. A faint haze stretches across them like breath on a mirror. Somewhere far away, lightning flickers. The air smells of river mud and smoke. Someone whispers that the gods are fighting again, that the Anunnaki are arguing, that the very framework of the world is under strain. You listen, and you feel the human need behind it, the need to explain why the wind feels wrong, Historians still argue whether these myths primarily preserve echoes of specific historical disasters, or whether they are more timeless symbolic stories that societies reuse and reshape across generations. And you, in the soft present tense of this night, do not have to choose one answer. You can hold both. You can keep the solid ground separate from the mist, and still enjoy the mist for what it is. A cool breath that makes the skin prickle without demanding you call it proof. So you walk, slowly, through a narrow street where the walls are plastered with mud and straw, and you hear water trickling in a canal. A cart creaks, a baby fusses. Life is normal, until the sky decides it is not. An eclipse. Perhaps the sun dimming in a way that makes birds act confused, or a meteor shower. Bright streaks that look like sparks falling from a blacksmith's anvil, or a dust storm that turns the horizon into a moving wall. These are real phenomena, and archaeology and astronomy can speak to them in broad strokes, but to the people beneath them, they can feel like a message, or a warning, or the collateral damage of a divine quarrel. A fringe idea proposes that some ancient descriptions of radiance and burning could hint at something like a catastrophic impact event or an eruption remembered through mythic language. This isn't widely accepted, and the leap is large. To be clear, this is debated, and often the evidence offered online is more vibe than verification. Still, if you treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it can sharpen your attention to the text, to the way people reach for images when they are afraid. You watch an old priest, in your imagination, sprinkle water and speak a prayer. You watch a scribe record the omen. You watch a king pretend not to be nervous, which is the oldest political tradition on earth. You watch the crowd look up, and you realize something gentle. Even if there is no literal Anunnaki war, even if the damage is metaphor, the feeling is real. The sense that the world can be wounded, the sense that nature can turn hostile, the sense that decisions made far away, by powers you cannot argue with, can ripple down into your kitchen and empty your jars. You take another breath. The fan hum, if you have it, becomes the river. Your blanket becomes the night air. Your room becomes a mud-brick chamber where the lamp is low. And the tablet in your hands remains quiet, patient, and stubbornly physical. Clay, weight, texture. A final small joke slips in. Because you deserve one. Imagine explaining to an ancient scribe that in the future, people will argue on glowing rectangles about what his God stories really mean, and he will just stare at you like, I was trying to get paid in barley. My friend, the cosmic mystery meets the humble paycheck, and somehow they live on the same tablet. You set the tablet down in your mind, not because you are finished, but because you want to look up again. The sky is still there, the stars still burn, the questions still drift. And in the space between what's documented and what's imagined, you let the possibility hover, soft and unforced, like a thin veil of cloud crossing the moon. You step out of the cool hush of the archive and into heat that feels immediate, like the sun is leaning close to tell you a secret. The ground under your feet is packed earth, textured with footprints, scattered straw, and the occasional sharp pebble that reminds you to keep your pace slow. A city rises around you in layers of mudbrick, light brown walls that catch the brightness and throw it back into your eyes. Most historians agree that the first cities in southern Mesopotamia grow dense and organized early, with temples, workshops, courtyards, canals, and streets that curve like they were negotiated by generations of neighbors rather than planned by a single architect. You move like a guest who does not want to knock anything over, which is good, because everything is fragile in the way that old systems are fragile. A basket of dates, a stack of reeds, a line of pottery drying in the shade. Even the air has a brittle edge, as if it could snap into dust if you breathe too hard. The evidence we do have points to an urban world built on water management. Canals feed fields. Fields feed people. People feed temples. Temples feed scribes. And scribes feed the story of who belongs where. That is the documented anchor, solid enough to hold your weight. But then you hear the other layer, the story layer, the kind that travels faster than carts. Someone mutters about an argument in the divine realm. Someone says the great ones are displeased. Someone says the Anunnaki are shifting their attention. And that is never a cozy thought. One interpretation is that divine conflict language works like political weather. When leaders compete, when taxes rise, when labor is demanded for building walls or digging canals, people may translate that pressure into mythic terms. A careful reading might suggest that the gods' moods are a way to talk about human decisions without saying a king's name out loud. It is safer to blame a storm god than to criticize the guy with the spear collection. You pass a courtyard where workers press bricks in wooden molds, lifting them out with a wet slap. They lay them in rows to dry, each brick a small rectangle of future. A child runs by carrying a jug that is almost too big, and you watch the jug wobble like it wants to become a disaster. The child makes it through, barely, which is an excellent lesson in ancient engineering and modern adulthood. Near a wall, an older man squats with a stylus and a tablet, counting, noting, recording. He scratches wedge marks with the focus of someone who understands that numbers are a form of magic. Grain delivered, beer issued, labor assigned. Most historians agree that cuneiform administration is deeply tied to temple economies in early periods, and that bureaucratic record-keeping is a major reason writing thrives. This is the city's heartbeat, not romantic, but real. Then a shout breaks the steady rhythm, not panic, more like the sharp sound of someone announcing something important. People turn their heads. A messenger is arriving. Dust coats his legs. His face is tense in a way that makes your stomach go a little quiet. He says a city to the north has refused an agreement, or a canal gate has been seized, or a boundary marker has been moved in the night. Details do not matter as much as the feeling, the sense that the city is no longer only worrying about harvest and trade, but about rivals. Most historians agree that early Mesopotamian city-states often compete for land, water rights, and prestige. The evidence we do have points to conflicts that can be seasonal and opportunistic, and sometimes very serious. Fortifications appear. Weapons appear. Kings boast of victories. That is documented enough to stand on. And then, because humans love turning politics into poetry, the conflict takes on a divine costume. The messenger's words ripple into rumor. People say, our God will defend us. People say, their God has grown arrogant. People say, the Anunnaki will decide who deserves to thrive. You walk toward the temple precinct, drawn by the way the air changes around it. The space feels more controlled, less chaotic. You smell incense and warm bread. You hear chanting, soft and rhythmic. Most historians agree that temples are central institutions, religious, economic, and social. Priests and administrators manage offerings, labor, and ceremonies. And the temple's presence is felt like gravity. You see a relief on a wall, not carved like later stone monument, but painted and pressed, showing a figure larger than others, receiving gifts. The figure's eyes are wide, stylized. In the art of the time, scale often reflects importance. One interpretation is that this visual language reinforces hierarchy, divine and human. The biggest figure is not just bigger. It is more real in the story people tell themselves. Now the mystery thread slips in. quiet as a cat entering a room where everyone pretends they did not notice. Some modern retellings describe the Anunnaki as if they are external invaders, as if the gods are not gods but something else. A fringe idea proposes that gods could be misremembered outsiders, powerful beings with advanced tools. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it often rests on interpretation more than evidence. Still, it persists because it makes a certain kind of dramatic sense. And humans love dramatic sense, even when the paperwork is weak. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a different kind of question. Not, did aliens do it? But why do people keep reaching for that explanation? What is it about these ancient stories that feels like a coded message to modern minds? You keep walking, letting the city answer in its own way. At the edge of the temple precinct, a group gathers around a storyteller. He is not reading a tablet. He is performing, voice rising and falling. His hands shape the air as if the air is clay. He speaks of gods arguing over destinies. He speaks of a conflict that shakes the land, and he uses images that make the crowd's faces tighten. A wind that scours fields, a fire that leaps across rooftops, a darkness at midday. A more cautious explanation could be that these images compress many real experiences into one dramatic narrative. A city might face drought one year, flood the next, and conflict the next, and memory stitches them together into a single time when the world went wrong. That is plausible and human, but what if the story is pointing at something else? What if the damage is not only physical, but social? In a crowded city, unrest can spread like smoke. A blocked canal is not only a water problem, it is a food problem, and a food problem becomes a trust problem. You can see it in the way people glance at the messenger. You can feel it in the way merchants suddenly talk faster. Calculating risk. You drift into a market where stalls shade goods with woven reed mats. You see copper tools, stone weights, jars of oil, bundles of wool. You smell fish and onions. The market is loud enough to make the silence of your bedroom feel like a luxury spa. A woman argues over the weight of barley. A man insists his wool is cleaner than it looks. You listen, amused, because thousands of years pass and the human ability to negotiate like it is an Olympic sport remains undefeated. Then you notice something else. Near the edge of the market, the ground is pale in patches, crusted. The soil looks tired, almost chalky. Archaeology suggests that in parts of southern Mesopotamia, long-term irrigation contributes to salinization, salt building up in the soil and reducing crop yields. Most historians agree that such environmental stress factors can play a role in economic and political shifts over time. This is solid ground again, a practical explanation that does not require cosmic warfare. Yet in the storyteller's language, this kind of slow damage can become a curse. The land is angry. The gods have turned their faces. The earth is wounded. One interpretation is that myth gives emotional clarity to gradual decline. It is easier to say, the gods fought and the land suffered, than to say, our irrigation practices are causing salinity problems and our administrative system cannot adapt quickly enough. That second sentence does not fit nicely into a chant. And it also makes people look guilty. You wander toward a canal, its water dull green in the sun. A gate controls the flow. Men with poles clear debris. A boy tosses a pebble and watches circles spread. It is peaceful for a moment. Then the sound of a drum rolls from the temple precinct, deep and deliberate. People pause, eyes shift. A ceremony is beginning, or perhaps a warning is being announced. The beat is steady, like a heart trying to convince the body not to panic. A priest raises his hands and speaks of order. He speaks of the gods maintaining balance. He speaks of the consequences when balance breaks. Historians still argue whether many of these narratives about divine conflict arise primarily from specific political events between city-states or from a broader mythic pattern that societies reuse to explain uncertainty. As you listen, you realize something quietly unsettling. The city's greatest achievement, its complexity, is also its vulnerability. When everything depends on coordinated water flow, coordinated labor, coordinated trust, a disruption can ripple like a crack through glass. A rival city taking a canal gate is not just a tactical move. It is a threat to the city's ability to remain itself. Now the cinematic possibility drifts in like evening shade. What if, in the minds of the people, the war among the Anunnaki is the way they speak about systemic fragility? What if Earth was damaged is the way they talk about the feeling of the ground no longer being dependable? You watch a worker press his palm into a fresh brick, leaving a mark that will dry into permanence. You watch a scribe count measures of grain. You watch the priest speak. You watch the messenger wipe dust from his face. And you sense the city like an organism, alive, hungry, clever, and always one bad season away from fear. A popular rumor claims that some of these ancient accounts hide the memory of a sudden, catastrophic event that physically scarred the land. The evidence for a single, specific Anunnaki war event is thin, and the responsible way to hold that rumor is gently, without certainty. Still, the idea lingers because the language of damage feels vivid, so you let it remain vivid without letting it become a verdict. The sun shifts. Shadows lengthen. The market noise changes pitch as people think about evening. Somewhere, a dog decides to be dramatic again, barking at a basket like it personally offended him. You almost laugh, because even the oldest city on Earth still has the same background soundtrack as your neighborhood. You take one last look at the pale crust on the soil, at the canal gate, at the temple's raised platform. The city stands, but it also trembles, not visibly, but in the way all complex things tremble. And as you walk, you carry the idea that damage can be sudden or slow, loud or quiet, cosmic or bureaucratic, and that ancient people, like you, use story to make the trembling feel nameable. You move through a gatehouse where the shade feels like cool water poured over your shoulders. The passage narrows, and the city's noise compresses into softer echoes, footsteps and murmurs bouncing off mudbrick. A guard watches you pass with the bored focus of someone whose job is to look suspicious at absolutely everyone, including goats, especially goats. Most historians agree that city-states in ancient Mesopotamia often defined themselves through a patron deity, a divine figure tied to the city's identity, legitimacy, and pride. In practical terms, that means politics, religion, and community life braid together until you cannot easily pull one strand without tugging the others. Ahead, you hear singing, not the dramatic, stage kind, but the steady, ceremonial kind, designed to keep a rhythm in your bones. You follow it toward a courtyard where people gather with offerings. Some carry baskets of bread, others bring oil, wool, or beer in jars sealed with clay stoppers. The evidence we do have points to temples as major hubs for collecting, redistributing, and recording resources, and to festivals as moments when social order is performed in public. Like a living diagram, you step closer and feel how the crowd organizes itself without anyone barking instructions. Elders at the front, workers and families behind. A few officials with neat hair and clean clothing positioned like chess pieces. The temple facade rises beyond them, and on it are symbols that mark the presence of the city's god. In this world, a symbol is not decoration. It is a statement of ownership. A priest begins to speak. His voice is calm, but it carries. He names the city's deity with reverence and confidence. He calls the god Lord or Lady of the city, depending on the tradition, and the crowd answers with a murmur that sounds like wind through reeds. Most historians agree that rulers in Mesopotamia often present themselves as chosen, protected, or guided by the gods, and that inscriptions frequently link victories, building projects, and justice to divine favor. This is a mainstream anchor you can stand on. Kings do not just rule, they narrate why they should rule. And the gods are excellent narrators because they cannot be cross-examined by your neighbor who still remembers you borrowed his donkey and returned it with a mysterious limp. One interpretation is that when texts describe gods quarreling, negotiating, or punishing, they may reflect tensions between cities, elite factions, or competing claims to resources. If you want to understand Anunnaki war language in a grounded way, you can see it as a mythic costume worn by political reality. City A fights City B, and the story becomes, our God fights their God, or the great council in heaven rules in our favor. You watch officials approach the altar, placing offerings with careful posture. Their movements are precise, like they practice in private. Behind them, a scribe kneels with a tablet on his lap, stylus in hand, recording what is given. The scribal habit is relentless, and honestly, it is kind of comforting. People may argue about gods, but the tablet quietly insists on inventory. Then you notice something else. A small group stands to one side, not quite joining the chorus. Their faces are serious. They are the kind of people who listen for subtext the way fishermen listen for a change in water. An official leans toward another and whispers. A nod. A glance toward the gate. A messenger arrives. And this time, the message is not about a canal gate or a boundary marker. It is about allegiance. A neighboring city has performed a ceremony claiming that a certain divine title belongs to their patron deity. It sounds small, almost silly, until you realize titles are political territory. If a city claims its god is king of the gods or chief of the Anunnaki, it is also claiming a kind of cosmic seniority. The spiritual hierarchy becomes a proxy for human hierarchy. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian religion is not static, and that gods can be elevated, merged, or emphasized differently as political power shifts. The evidence we do have points to a world where theology can follow empire, where the rise of one city can amplify the status of its divine patron. You feel the crowd's mood tighten as the whisper spreads. Some people look offended, as if someone insulted their family. Others look worried, because offense can lead to conflict, and conflict can lead to taxes, and taxes lead to the universal human groan. Now the mystery angle slides in softly. Modern retellings sometimes treat the Anunnaki as a single organized group with internal factions, almost like rival houses in an epic saga. A fringe idea proposes that ancient references to a divine council could be literal, as if the gods are an external group making decisions about humans. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it often leans on imaginative readings. Still, it can create an eerie mood when you picture a council that meets beyond the sky, arguing while cities sweat and pray below. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a cinematic lens. You imagine a high chamber of light, a council of powerful figures debating destiny like it is a budget meeting. Someone slams a celestial tablet on the table. Someone says, "No, the humans cannot have that much autonomy." And another says, "Fine, but at least let them invent bread. Because even cosmic beings should respect bread." Back on the ground, the priest's voice grows firmer. He speaks of order, He speaks of the city's god as defender, as judge, as source of abundance. Then he shifts into warning language, the kind designed to make people stand taller. He implies that rival claims are not just rude, but dangerous. He implies that the divine world is stirred. One interpretation is that this is rhetoric, a way to rally unity and obedience. If the people fear cosmic consequences, they may be more willing to contribute labor, pay offerings, support the ruler, and accept hardship. That does not mean the priest is lying. He may fully believe it. Belief is powerful, and it can be sincere and useful at the same time. You walk along the edge of the courtyard and notice painted scenes on plaster, figures with horned crowns, symbols of authority. Horned crowns in Mesopotamian art often signal divinity. You notice how consistently the divine is associated with order, hierarchy, and the right to command. Then your gaze catches a small scene in the corner, a creature being subdued, a chaotic form pressed down by a stronger figure. This motif, the defeat of chaos, is common across many cultures. Archaeology suggests that people use such images to express a basic hope that the world can be controlled enough to live in. It is not childish. It is survival. A group of young men carry long poles and shields toward a storage building. Their faces are serious, but also a little excited in that awful way people can be excited about conflict because it makes them feel important. You know that feeling, even if you pretend you do not. They talk about honor, duty, protection. You also notice how quickly they avoid mentioning risk, pain, and hungry winters. Humans are experts at editing their own trailers. You drift toward a side room where an administrator meets with several officials. They speak quietly about alliances, trade routes, and whether to send gifts to a neighboring temple to smooth tensions. Gifts are diplomacy, and diplomacy is cheaper than rebuilding walls. Most historians agree that intercity relations involve treaties, marriages, trade, and sometimes war, and that religious ceremonies and gifts can be part of these relationships. The administrator pulls out a tablet and points to lines. He is not reading a hymn. He is reading quantities: barley, silver, wool, labor days. You almost want to pat him on the shoulder and say, "Thank you for keeping the world boring enough to function," but you refrain because he looks like the kind of man who would record your pat as a taxable event. In the temple courtyard, the priest begins a chant invoking multiple gods, not just the city's patron. This is your reminder that Mesopotamian religion is layered. There are many gods, with overlapping roles, and the Anunnaki label can sometimes hover over certain groups within that complexity. What's broadly accepted is that a divine assembly is a recurring idea, a council that sets destinies. It is also broadly accepted that different texts and periods treat these categories in different ways, which makes modern simplifications risky. Historians still argue whether divine council language in these traditions is primarily a poetic framework for describing fate and social order, or whether it reflects specific political attempts by city elites to standardize and control religious authority. Now you step outside the temple precinct into a street where the sound of the chant fades, and the city's everyday life returns. A potter turns a wheel, hands slick with clay. A woman scolds a child for stepping in wet plaster. The child offers the universal defense, which is basically, "It was like that already." A lie that could be inscribed on a tablet and still be believable 4,000 years later. You follow the street to a small shrine, simpler than the main temple. Someone has placed a figurine there. Maybe a protective spirit figure, maybe an offering to a household deity. The evidence we do have points to religion existing at many scales, from state temples to private practices. People do not only worship for politics, They worship because they want their baby to survive, their crop to grow, their roof to hold, their dreams to be kinder. A more cautious explanation could be that when myths speak of war among gods, they gather and magnify the pressures people feel. The same story can speak to the king's legitimacy and the farmer's anxiety. That dual function is part of why it lasts. But the cinematic mist returns, gentle and tempting. What if the war is not only metaphor, but a memory of a time when the environment seemed to shift violently? A sudden dust storm that blotted out the sun, a severe flood that left rot and insects, a rare celestial event that frightened people into believing the sky itself was in conflict. These are plausible triggers for mythic language, and they do not require exotic explanations. Still, there is room for mystery as atmosphere. You walk past a wall where someone has scratched a symbol into the plaster, a private sign, maybe a prayer. You imagine a person late at night, hands trembling, asking for protection because rumors of conflict are spreading. In that private moment, the Anunnaki are not an internet headline. They are the name of whatever power decides whether tomorrow is normal. You reach a rooftop and look out. The city is a patchwork of flat roofs, courtyards, and narrow lanes. Beyond, fields stretch toward the river. The river glints in the distance. It looks calm, which is almost suspicious, because rivers always look calm right before they ruin your plans. You let the rooftop breeze cool your face. You imagine, for one quiet second, that the gods are watching too, or at least that people feel watched. And that feeling shapes behavior. That is one of the simplest truths of human society. Whether the watcher is a god, a king, or your neighbor who loves gossip, being watched changes you. And in that slow rooftop moment, the idea of Earth damaged by Anunnaki war becomes less like a headline and more like a lens. Damage can mean the fear that order is cracking. Damage can mean a city's trust fraying. Damage can mean fields turning bitter with salt. Damage can mean that when people argue over titles in heaven, the arguments echo into streets and kitchens. You exhale, and the night air feels softer. The city below continues, stubborn and human. Somewhere a goat chooses the exact wrong time to scream, sounding like a tiny apocalypse siren. You almost laugh, because even the gods would probably file a complaint about that goat. You turn away from the edge and let your pace slow, carrying the steady thought that in this world, politics often speaks through divinity, and divinity often hides politics. And the line between them is as thin as a reed stylus pressed into wet clay. You leave the city's warmer air and walk into open land where the horizon feels wide enough to swallow your thoughts. The ground is firm, scattered with tufts of scrub and stones that glitter faintly in the sun like someone dropped a handful of dull beads. A road, more suggestion than pavement, curves toward a cluster of tents and wagons. People are gathered there with faces turned upward, shielding their eyes, watching clouds that are not behaving politely. Most historians agree that Mesopotamia's climate and weather can be harsh and dramatic, with dust storms, violent winds, and intense seasonal shifts. The evidence we do have points to societies that develop sophisticated water management and agricultural practices precisely because nature is not always cooperative. That is the documented anchor. A practical world where survival is an ongoing negotiation with heat, river, and sky. You step into the camp's edge and feel a change in mood. It is not fear exactly. It is anticipation. The kind you feel when the air tastes different and your body suspects a storm before your brain admits it. A man points at the western horizon where a brownish veil is rising, low and thick. A woman tightens cloth around her hair. Someone begins pulling ropes to secure a tent. A child asks a question, and the adult answers too quickly. which is how you know the adult is worried. Then the wind hits, not the gentle breezy kind that makes you want to buy a drink and pretend you are in a commercial. This wind is rude. It comes in with the confidence of someone who never has to apologize. It picks up grit and flings it at your face. Your eyes water. Your mouth goes dry. The world shrinks to the distance you can see through dust. Archaeology suggests that dust storms and wind erosion can shape landscapes and affect settlements, especially when combined with drought or overuse of land. Most historians agree that people in the region experience environmental stresses that can disrupt agriculture and trade. This is the kind of event that can feel like a battle. Even if nobody swings a sword, a careful reading might suggest that when ancient texts describe weapons of thunder or winds that flatten, they may be using poetic language for storms. Storm gods are common in Mesopotamian religion, and that makes sense. A storm can destroy crops in minutes, tear down weak structures, and turn your carefully planned life into a pile of grit. If your society depends on the harvest, the storm is not just weather, it is judgment. You crouch behind a wagon and listen to the sound of dust hitting wood like sand thrown at a drum. People shout instructions. Someone laughs nervously because laughter is a pressure valve. And humans have always had that little habit of giggling in the wrong moment, like, "Yes, universe, I see you are trying to kill my vibe." Then, as quickly as it arrives, the storm's worst edge shifts. The dust curtain slides past, leaving the air still thick but less violent. The camp emerges again in pieces. You blink and see shapes return, the outline of a man, the line of a rope, the curve of a jar. A priest or ritual specialist steps forward, holding a small bowl. He murmurs words into the wind, making an offering, asking for calm. Most historians agree that ritual responses to natural events are common in ancient Mesopotamia, and that people use prayer, offerings, and ceremonies to seek protection and meaning. The evidence we do have points to a worldview where nature is intertwined with divine intention. Now the phrase that modern retellings love returns in your mind. War. If a dust storm can be an attack, what other weapons might a story describe? You walk beyond the camp toward a shallow depression where water sometimes gathers. In the center, you find dried, cracked mud like a mosaic of broken plates. It crunches under your feet. The cracks are deep enough to catch shadows. You kneel and touch the surface. It is warm and brittle. Archaeology suggests that drought cycles, river shifts, and changing water availability can leave signatures in sediment and settlement patterns. Most historians agree that these environmental changes can contribute to social stress, migration, and conflict. Again, solid ground. But the stories do not say, "We experienced multi-year drought stress and our irrigation system struggled." The stories say, "The god withdrew the waters," or "the land was struck," or "the fields drank salt." One interpretation is that radiant weapons language is metaphorical. Lightning is radiant. The sun is radiant. Fire from a lightning strike is radiant. A more cautious explanation could be that when a text speaks of something shining or burning, it may be describing natural phenomena, wildfires, lightning, scorching heat, or even a plague described through the imagery of heat and breath. Still, a fringe idea proposes that some lines in ancient literature, especially when filtered through later translations and imaginative retellings, could be read as descriptions of advanced technology or devastating energy. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it often depends on selective reading. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. There is no tidy, mainstream consensus that any cuneiform text describes a literal superweapon, but the rumor persists because it offers a dramatic explanation for the vividness of the language. So you hold the rumor lightly, not as a conclusion, but as a mood. You let it color the air while you stay rooted in what is more certain. You keep walking until you reach a line of low hills, not mountains, just gentle rises where rock breaks the flatness. You find an outcrop with dark stones, and near it, a scatter of charcoal and ash. Maybe a cooking fire from travelers, maybe remains of a small work site. The smell of old ash lingers faintly, and it makes you think of how fire is both friend and threat. Most historians agree that fire is used in daily life for cooking, crafts, and metallurgy, and also used in conflict through burning fields and structures. Archaeology suggests that burned layers in some sites can indicate destruction events, though interpreting them requires caution. A burned layer could be war, accident, or controlled firing. You imagine a settlement at night, lamps glowing, then a sudden flare, roofs catching, people running, shouting, the heat forcing everyone into the open. In myth, that becomes a god's weapon. In reality, it could be raiders or an accident. Either way, the memory says, what if poets accidentally describe a technology they barely understand? That is a thrilling thought, and it is exactly the kind of thought you should label carefully. It is possible, but not strongly supported. A careful reading might suggest that poetic exaggeration is enough to explain most of it. Still, even exaggeration tends to pick images that feel familiar, and familiar images often come from real experiences. Lightning, fire, wind, darkness, flood. You climb the low hill and look out across the plain. The river lies in the distance, a ribbon of dull silver. Between you and it are fields, canals, and small dots that might be animals or people. The landscape looks peaceful from up here, which is funny, because peace is often just distance plus ignorance. A group of soldiers or guards passes along the road, their sandals scuffing dust. Their weapons are simple, spears and shields, maybe a bow. Their leader speaks quietly, scanning the horizon. Most historians agree that armed forces exist in these societies, organized under rulers, and that conflict between city-states is a recurring reality. The evidence we do have points to war as a human factor in land damage, through destruction, displacement, and disrupted farming. Now, the Anunnaki idea slips in as interpretation. One interpretation is that when a city loses a battle, the story becomes, the gods fought and we were caught beneath their feet. The soldiers become the gods' hands. The king becomes the gods' chosen. The enemy becomes chaos, not just another group of hungry people with similar sandals. A popular rumor claims that certain ancient places become forbidden after divine conflict, as if the land itself is contaminated or cursed. The evidence for specific contamination narratives is mixed and often later, and the responsible stance is cautious. Still, taboo zones exist in many cultures, and they can reflect real danger, political boundaries, or sacred restrictions. You descend the hill toward a cluster of standing stones that mark a boundary. Someone has painted symbols on them. The paint is faded, but still visible. You feel a strange hush as you approach, like the air is holding its breath. A few travelers keep their distance, stepping around as if the ground near the stones might bite. You ask, in your mind, why? A more cautious explanation could be that the stones mark a contested border, a place where ambush is likely, so people avoid it. Another could be that the stones mark a sacred limit tied to a temple's land holdings. Or maybe there was a past tragedy there, a skirmish, a flood, a lightning strike, and people wrap it in myth so the memory sticks. Then the cinematic mist rises again. What if the taboo is older than anyone remembers? What if something happened that made the land feel wrong, and the only language left for it is divine war? Historians still argue whether dramatic battle descriptions in Mesopotamian myth are best read as direct reflections of historical events. as symbolic narratives about order and chaos, or as layered memories that combine multiple kinds of disaster. You sit by the boundary stones and let the wind cool your face. The air is clearer now. The dust storm is gone, and the world feels freshly scrubbed, like someone shook out a rug. In the distance, you hear a faint rumble, possibly thunder, possibly a cart on a rough road. Your brain wants it to be thunder because thunder makes stories easier. A man approaches carrying a jar of water. He offers you a sip, and you accept, because in this world you do not turn down water unless you are auditioning for the role of person who makes bad choices. The water tastes slightly earthy, river-flavored, but it cools your throat. He tells a story, not a written one, a spoken one. He says his grandfather said there was a time when the sky burned red for nights. He says the elders said the great ones argued, and the land paid the price. He cannot prove it. He does not try. He tells it like a weather report for the soul. You listen, and you notice how stories survive. They do not survive because they are precise. They survive because they are useful. They warn, they explain. They bind people together in shared memory. So, when you hear Earth was damaged, you can hold multiple layers at once. Documented environmental stress, documented human conflict, interpretation through divine language, and, hovering softly, the possibility that rare natural events, like unusual storms or celestial displays, might have fed the most vivid images. You stand and look out again. The plain stretches wide. The river glints. The sky is pale and endless, and you let the idea settle into your chest in a calm way. Not as proof, not as panic, just as a quiet recognition that in the ancient world, nature and war can both feel like attacks from above, and the story of divine weapons may be the mind's way of giving shape to forces that do not ask permission. You come to water again, not the tidy canal kind, but the broad, slow muscle of a river that looks calm while secretly rehearsing chaos. The banks are soft and dark, and reeds lean over the surface like they are eavesdropping. You smell wet earth, a rich scent that almost feels edible. Most historians agree that the great rivers of Mesopotamia shape everything: agriculture, trade, settlement locations, and also catastrophe. The evidence we do have points to flooding as a recurring reality, sometimes helpful, sometimes destructive, and always worth respecting. A ferry is tied to a post. A man with arms like braided rope gestures for you to step aboard. You do, feeling the wooden planks flex under your weight. The river carries you into a wide current, and the world seems to slow, as if the water is teaching you how to breathe. On the far side, the land rises slightly, and you see a low mound where a settlement once stood. It is not a dramatic ruin with towering columns. It is a subtle swelling in the landscape, the kind that looks like a natural hill until you realize it is layered human life. Brick dust, broken pottery, ash, and time. Archaeology suggests that many Mesopotamian sites are tells, built up over centuries as structures are rebuilt on top of older structures. That is solid ground again, a documented way the past stacks itself. You climb the mound carefully, noticing pottery sherds underfoot like scattered pieces of a long-forgotten kitchen. The air is warm, but a breeze from the river cools your neck. At the top, you see an area where the soil color changes. A band of darker silt lies beneath a lighter layer, like a bruise in the earth. Most historians agree that flood deposits can be found in some excavated sites, and that ancient people remember major floods in stories. The evidence we do have points to flood memory is a powerful element in Mesopotamian tradition, not only because floods happen, but because they feel like the world resetting without asking. You crouch and let your fingers sift the dirt. It is fine, almost silky. You imagine water rushing across this place, carrying reeds, branches, perhaps even parts of roofs. You imagine people scrambling to higher ground, clutching children, livestock, jars of grain. The river does not negotiate. It simply arrives. One interpretation is that when texts speak of the earth being damaged or ruined, flood experience may be part of the emotional vocabulary. Floods erase boundaries, knock down walls, and leave behind a landscape that looks unfamiliar. If your world is mostly mudbrick and reed, water is not a visitor. It is an editor with a ruthless red pen. You walk down the mound and follow a narrow path along the riverbank. Ahead, a series of fields spreads out, divided by low berms. The plants are green, but the green is uneven. Some rows look healthy, others look stunted, pale at the tips. A farmer stands with hands on hips, staring at the patchy growth like he is trying to stare the plants into behaving. Archaeology suggests that irrigation in southern Mesopotamia is both a triumph and a long-term challenge, and that salinization can reduce yields. Most historians agree that this kind of slow environmental stress can contribute to social and economic strain. You can see it in the farmer's face. The look of someone who did everything right and still got punished by chemistry. He scoops soil and rubs it between his fingers. You taste the air and imagine the faint tang of salt. The field is not burned. It is not flooded right now. It is simply getting tired. This is the quiet kind of damage, the kind that does not make a good heroic story. But it can empty a city all the same. A careful reading might suggest that curse language in ancient texts can encode this sort of slow decline. When a story says, "The god turned the land bitter," a more cautious explanation could be that the land is literally becoming less productive due to salt buildups, canal silt, or poor drainage. The myth language is the emotional wrapper, but the wrapped thing is real. Still, in the story world, the idea of an Anunnaki war can attach itself to this bitterness. People do not like slow, boring explanations. They prefer a dramatic reason. The Anunnaki fought, and the land suffered. You can almost hear the storyteller's voice rising, because it is more satisfying than "we need better water management." Now the mystery element slides in, gentle as fog. A popular rumor claims that after a divine conflict, certain lands become dead, unable to grow. The rumor often uses modern language like contamination or scorched earth, and it sometimes tries to connect ancient descriptions to modern concepts. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it often stretches the ancient texts beyond what they clearly say. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. The evidence is thin for a single, specific event that permanently damaged Earth in a global sense. But the feeling of dead land is not thin at all. It is right here in the uneven field. You continue walking until you reach a small canal where water trickles through a gate. The gate is made of wood and packed reeds, patched with mud. It leaks in a steady drip, as if the canal is sweating. A boy sits nearby with a stick, poking at the water. He looks up at you with the calm curiosity of someone who has never seen your kind of sandals. He tells you, in simple words, that last season the water came too fast. Then it came too little. He tells you the elders argued about opening the gate. He tells you someone said the gods were angry. Most historians agree that canal management decisions can be politically charged, and the evidence we do have points to disputes over water rights and irrigation maintenance. One interpretation is that divine war language can reflect the social conflicts that arise when water becomes scarce or unpredictable. Humans fight over water now. They definitely fought over water then. The difference is, now we add spreadsheets. Back then, they added omens. You walk toward a cluster of houses near the fields. The walls are cracked in places. You see a patch where mud plaster has been recently applied, darker and smoother than the rest. A woman sweeps her threshold with a bundle of reeds, pushing dust out into the street with the tired determination of someone who has been sweeping the same dust since the dawn of time. You watch her and feel the small truth of daily life. Disaster is not only dramatic events. It is also the constant labor of keeping your home from dissolving. Inside one house, you hear chanting. It is quiet, intimate. You step closer and see a family gathered around a small bowl of water. They speak words asking for protection from flood and drought. The evidence we do have points to household religion existing alongside temple worship. Most historians agree that people perform rituals for everyday safety, health, and prosperity. A more cautious explanation could be that flood myths and divine war myths both serve a similar psychological function. They create a narrative frame for uncertainty. If you can name the force, you can negotiate with it, at least in your mind. Even if negotiation is just offering bread and hoping. You step back outside and look at the sky. Clouds are forming, tall and fight. They look peaceful, but you know how quickly peace can turn into thunder. You imagine an ancient observer seeing those clouds and thinking of them as the breath of a god. Now you come to a place where the riverbank is eroded, exposing layers of earth like a sliced cake. You see a pale layer, then a darker one, then another pale. Each layer is a season, a flood, a dry time. You run your fingers along the edge and feel grains crumble. Time is granular, literally. Historians still argue whether ancient flood narratives preserve memories of one particularly massive flood event or whether they are a composite tradition built from many floods across many generations. You sit on a flat stone and let your legs rest. The river murmurs. A bird calls. Somewhere, a fisherman slaps the water with a net, and the sound travels across the surface like a quiet applause. Now the cinematic possibility arrives. Not to claim, but to color. What if a flood felt like a war? What if the sound of water smashing walls sounded like an army? What if the sky turned a strange color during a storm, and people said it was the light of a battle above? What if a rare event, like an unusual storm pattern or a distant volcanic haze, made sunsets red for days, and that redness became the story's bloodless battlefield in the heavens? That is imagined. And it is allowed to be imagined, as long as you keep it labeled as possibility. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. You can hold that without pretending it is proof. A fringe idea proposes that flood stories might be linked to dramatic global events, like rapid sea level changes or faraway cataclysms. But connecting specific local stories to specific global events is complex and not widely agreed upon. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it continues to float around because humans love a single big cause for many messy effects. You stand and walk along the river again, thinking about damage as something layered. Flood deposits on a mound, salt in a field, cracked plaster on a house wall, arguments over gate valves, fear translated into prayer. If you want to imagine an Anunnaki war in a safe, careful way, you can see it as a mythic name for the clash of forces that shape this land. Water versus wall, salt versus seed, heat versus labor, rival city versus rival city. The gods in the story become the faces of these forces, giving them personality, motives, and the kind of drama that helps memory stick. You glance down and notice a small clay figurine lodged near the riverbank, half buried in silt. It might be a child's toy. It might be a protective charm. You pick it up gently and brush off wet dirt. Its features are simple, but the face has wide eyes, It stares up at you as if it knows something. You smile, because of course it does. Everything here knows something. The river knows, the mud knows, the salt knows, the stories know, and you keep walking, letting the river's steady sound carry the thought that Earth's damage can be written in layers, in soil and in myth, with each generation adding a new line to the tablet of the land. You find yourself under a night sky so clear it feels freshly washed, as if someone polished the darkness until it shines. The air is cooler now, and the ground still holds the day's warmth, sending it up through your sandals in a gentle pulse. You're standing on a flat rooftop beside a small group of observers, people wrapped in simple cloth, their faces turned upward with the patient intensity of those who believe the sky is readable. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian scholars developed careful traditions of observing celestial phenomena, recording patterns, and treating unusual events as meaningful. The evidence we do have points to a culture where eclipses, comets, planetary movements, and strange atmospheric displays become part of a structured interpretive system, especially in later periods, even if you are not holding a formal astronomy text in your mind. You are standing inside the habit that produces them. A man beside you holds a small board with marks scratched into it. Not a finished tablet, more like a working surface. He points to a bright planet near the horizon and murmurs its name. He gestures toward a cluster of stars and describes what it means for the city. The words are measured, not frantic. This is the calm voice of someone who has trained himself to treat wonder as a job. You sit, and the rooftop's clay surface feels smooth under your fingers. Somewhere below, a dog sighs, then settles somewhere else. Someone coughs in the dark. Life is quiet. The sky's loud. Then it happens. A slow change. At first, almost nothing. The moon's edge looks slightly bruised. A bite seems to appear on its rim. The observers straighten. A whispered phrase moves through them like a small wave. An eclipse. Most historians agree that eclipses are among the most dramatic and widely noticed celestial events, and that ancient societies often interpret them as ominous. The evidence we do have points to Mesopotamian omen traditions where eclipses are carefully categorized, their timing and appearance linked to predictions about rulers, cities, and harvests. You watch the shadow creep, and it feels unreal, like the world is being dimmed by an invisible hand. The moon becomes a curved sliver, then a dark coin. The rooftop grows colder. The stars seem sharper, as if the sky is taking advantage of the dimming to show off. One interpretation is that war in heaven language could reflect experiences like this. If the moon is being attacked, if darkness arrives out of schedule, it is easy to imagine conflict above. A careful reading might suggest that when myths describe divine battles, they may be drawing on real sky events that feel like cosmic drama. The observers begin to chant softly, not screaming, not panicking, but performing the proper response. They place small offerings on a cloth. Bread, oil, a pinch of incense. Someone murmurs the names of gods associated with the moon, the night, and fate. The chant is steady, like a lullaby for the universe. And honestly, it is kind of sweet. Imagine singing to the sky like it is a moody roommate who forgot to pay rent. Please stop being weird. We have crops tomorrow. A more cautious explanation could be that this ritual is not only about fear, it is about control. When you live in a world where you cannot change the eclipse, you can at least do something. You can chant, you can offer, you can record, you can feel less helpless. The man with the marked board begins to note the moment the darkness peaks. Another observer counts quietly, perhaps by heartbeat, perhaps by practiced rhythm. This is the seed of Lota's scholarly precision, a mind that wants patterns, a mind that believes the sky has rules. Now the mystery thread slips in, and you handle it gently. A popular rumor claims that ancient descriptions of heavenly battles might refer to extraordinary celestial events beyond normal eclipses, like meteor storms, comet tails, or rare atmospheric glows. This is plausible in the sense that such phenomena do occur and can be frightening. It becomes less plausible when people jump from rare sky event to literal Anunnaki war technology, because that leap requires evidence that is not present in mainstream scholarship. Still, the mood is powerful. The rooftop, the chanting, the moon darkened. If you were trying to write a myth, you could not design a better scene. The eclipse begins to release its grip. The moon's edge brightens. The shadow slides away. Slowly, the world returns to its usual contrast, and you feel everyone's shoulders drop a fraction, like a collective exhale. Then, as if the sky wants to keep the audience, a streak of light flashes across the darkness. A meteor, quick and clean. Someone gasps. Another streak follows, then another. A brief shower, not long enough to be a grand storm, but enough to make the observers exchange glances. Most historians agree that meteor events are observed and often interpreted in many cultures. And the evidence we do have points to ancient people treating stars falling as meaningful signs. One interpretation is that clustered meteors after an eclipse could feel like the aftermath of a cosmic clash. Sparks still flying from the gods' arguments. You lean back and watch, and for a moment the rooftop becomes a theater. The sky is the stage. The gods are the actors. The audience is a handful of tired humans trying to understand whether tomorrow will be kind. Historians still argue whether the primary function of Mesopotamian celestial omen traditions is predictive in a practical political sense, symbolic and ritual in a social sense, or psychological in a personal coping sense. Now you notice a detail that feels surprisingly modern. One of the observers is not only watching, he is already thinking about who will hear the report. The palace, the temple administrators, the city council. The sky is not only beauty, it is information, and information is power. A careful reading might suggest that omen interpretation can become a political tool. If an eclipse is said to predict danger to a ruler, that might justify protective rituals, emergency measures, or even changes in leadership. In some traditions, substitute kings are appointed temporarily during ominous periods. The evidence we do have points to complex ritual systems designed to manage perceived cosmic risk. You imagine, just for a second, the bureaucratic version of cosmic fair. Dear sir, the moon did a suspicious thing, therefore please allocate additional barley for protective ceremonies. Somewhere in the ancient world. An accountant sighs deeply, because accountants are immortal in spirit. Now, bring in the Anunnaki angle as interpretation. Most historians agree that references to divine councils and assemblies appear across Mesopotamian texts, and that different groups of gods are named in different contexts. One interpretation is that when a myth says the great ones met and argued, it mirrors the human experience of councils, assemblies, and court politics. The sky becomes a reflection of the city's own meeting rooms. But what if the story is pointing at something else? What if Earth damaged by war is, in part, the feeling of living under a sky that can change without warning? Imagine being a farmer planning your irrigation schedule. Then an eclipse arrives and everyone treats it like a sign that the world's contract has been rewritten. Even if the eclipse does nothing physically to your fields, the social response to it can. People may delay work. People may gather in temples. Leaders may impose rituals. Anxiety can alter behavior, and behavior can alter outcomes. A more cautious explanation could be that the damage is partly social, ripples of decisions made in response to omens. In that sense, the sky does not need to shoot anything at the earth. It only needs to frighten the people who manage the gates and granaries. A fringe idea proposes that some ancient sky descriptions might reflect encounters with rare atmospheric phenomena, like unusual auroras visible at lower latitudes during extreme solar activity, or volcanic haze that changes the color of sunsets. This theory isn't widely accepted in specific text-by-text claims, but as a general possibility, it is reasonable. Such events can make the sky look wounded, bruised, or burning, and humans will always narrate what they see. You watch the horizon where the city's lamps flicker. The air smells faintly of smoke and oil. The rooftop clay cools under you. One observer lifts a small tablet and begins to press marks, recording the eclipse and the meteors. The stylus clicks softly. Press. Lift. Press. Lift. That sound becomes your lullaby, a tiny percussion that says, whatever happens, we can at least write it down. You notice the observer's expression, not fear, more like responsibility. He believes the sky's message matters. He believes someone needs to know. The evidence we do have points to a long tradition of scribes and scholars treating records as valuable. Most historians agree that this habit of recording is one reason we can even talk about these worlds today. You stand and stretch, feeling the night air slide over your skin. The moon is bright again. The meteors are gone. The sky looks innocent, which is the most suspicious look of all. You start to walk across the rooftop, passing a clay jar and a folded cloth. Below you, the city sleeps in patches. Somewhere, someone is still awake, listening for changes in the wind. Because when you live in this place, you never fully stop listening, and you carry a quiet understanding. Celestial events can feel like battles. They can inspire stories of councils and wars. They can make people believe the earth itself is under judgment, whether the Anunnaki are treated as literal beings or mythic figures. Their war can be read as the mind's way of explaining a sky that sometimes behaves like a restless, unpredictable power. You take one more look up, letting the stars settle your thoughts. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. And tonight, the sky has given you all three, without saying a single word. You walk into hills that feel older than memory. A place where the wind changes its voice as it threads between stones. The path narrows, and your sandals scrape over gravel. Ahead, the land rises into a ridge with pockets of scrub and thorn, and beyond it, a pass opens like a mouth. Travelers move through it in small groups, keeping their spacing, because this is the kind of terrain where you learn not to bunch up like a snack tray. Most historians agree that Mesopotamia depends heavily on trade for materials not abundant in the alluvial plains, such as timber, stone, and metals, and that routes connect the river cities to uplands and distant regions. The evidence we do have points to caravans, merchants, and organized exchange as essential to urban life. This is documented ground, and it already explains a lot about why certain areas feel guarded, valuable, and sometimes tense. A man with a pack animal pauses near you and adjusts a strap. The animal flicks an ear and gives you the look of a creature that has carried too many human ambitions and would like a raise. The pack is heavy with something dense, maybe copper ingots or stone blocks. You hear the soft clink of metal when the load shifts. The pass is watched, not by a huge army, but by a handful of guards positioned where they can see both directions. They hold spears. Their faces are tired. One leans on his weapon like it is also a walking stick, which is honestly relatable. They stop travelers, ask questions, inspect goods. It is routine. It is also power. One interpretation is that forbidden zones in myth can reflect real control points like this. Places where resources move and authority asserts itself. A careful reading might suggest that when a story says, "The gods closed the mountain," it could be encoding human decisions to restrict access, to tax trade, or to protect supplies. In other words, the divine language might be a polite cover for, "We do not want you here unless you pay." You pass the guards after a brief inspection. They glance at you with mild confusion, as if you are missing a stamp. You keep walking, and the air begins to smell different, less river damp and more mineral dry. The rocks underfoot have darker veins. In a shallow cut in the hillside, you see evidence of digging, not a full mine with timber supports, but a worked place where stone has been pried and hammered. Archaeology suggests that ancient peoples exploit local sources of stone and minerals where available, and that quarrying and mining can leave traces in the landscape. Most historians agree that access to metals and stone can shape political relationships and conflict. This is still mainstream, still solid. Then you notice something unsettling. A boundary marker near the worked cut, a pile of stones arranged carefully, with a symbol pressed into a small clay lump at its base. The symbol is simple, but deliberate, like a warning. Nearby, an offering has been placed. A bit of bread, a few grains, maybe a small cup of beer poured onto the ground. Someone has tried to keep this place calm. A popular rumor claims that certain places become taboo because they are damaged by divine conflict, and that people avoid them because the ground is unsafe in a mysterious way. The responsible approach is cautious. Many taboos can be explained by very human reasons: danger of collapse, bandit risk, political boundaries, sacred ownership, or simple superstition that grows around a frightening event. Still, the mood of taboo is real. You feel it in the way travelers lower their voices. You feel it in the way they do not linger near the cut. They move through, eyes forward, as if the rocks might remember them. Most historians agree that sacred boundaries exist in Mesopotamian culture, with temples owning land and defining spaces as holy or restricted. The evidence we do have points to rituals marking borders, and to the idea that crossing certain lines without permission can bring consequences. Social and spiritual. That is the documented anchor. Now the interpretation angle deepens. One interpretation is that Anunnaki war stories may map onto these controlled landscapes. The gods in conflict become a way of narrating why certain routes are contested, why certain resources are guarded, why some lands feel off-limits. If a city claims a god grants it authority over a pass, then controlling the pass is not merely policy. It is destiny. You climb higher into the ridge and reach a vantage point where you can see a patchwork of valleys. A thin line of smoke rises from a small camp. Further away, you spot a fortified outpost, low walls and a watchtower. It is not grand, but it is placed with care. The people here understand visibility. You approach the outpost slowly. A gate opens just enough for a guard to look out, then wider as he recognizes the caravan behind you. Inside, you see stored goods, bundles of timber, sacks of ore, stone blocks. An administrator sits on a stool with a tablet on his lap, stylus poised, recording what arrives and what leaves. The world may feel mystical, but it runs on lists. A careful reading might suggest that the Council of Gods idea mirrors these administrative systems. The gods assign destinies the way officials assign rations. The Anunnaki judge the way gatekeepers judge who passes. It is possible that the divine bureaucracy is a reflection of the human one. People build institutions, then imagine the cosmos as a bigger institution. Historians still argue whether taboo and boundary language in Mesopotamian myth is primarily religious in nature, or whether it often functions as a symbolic cover for economic and political control. Now you step into a small shrine within the outpost. It is cramped, barely more than a niche with a platform. On it sits a figurine with a horned crown, stylized and stern. Someone has placed a few stones around it, perhaps to represent mountains, perhaps to represent protection. A lamp flickers, casting moving shadows that make the figurine look like it is breathing. Most historians agree that small shrines and local cult practices exist alongside major temples, and the evidence we do have points to religion being woven into daily operations, including trade and travel. If you are moving valuable goods through risky terrain, you want every kind of protection you can get. You want guards, walls, and a little divine insurance, just in case. The shrine keeper, an older woman with steady eyes, offers you a pinch of incense. You wave it toward the lamp flame, and the smoke rises in a thin line. It smells sweet and sharp. She murmurs that the pass is safe today. She says the mountain spirits are calm. She says the great ones are watching. Now the mystery element slips in, gentle but present. A fringe idea proposes that the forbidden zones in ancient stories might reflect places where something unusual happened, like a rare natural hazard, toxic fumes, or strange ground behavior, remembered through myth as divine anger. This theory isn't widely accepted, and specific identifications are hard. But as a general possibility, it is reasonable that dangerous places become sacred or taboo. Humans have a talent for turning hazard into holiness. You follow the shrine keeper outside, and she points to a spot further along the ridge where the rocks are stained a pale greenish hue. She warns you not to sleep there. She says the air can make you dizzy. That is an old kind of knowledge, not written in a textbook, but passed along because it keeps people alive. A more cautious explanation could be that the green staining indicates minerals that weather in ways that affect air or water locally, or simply a place where wind patterns trap dust. Even without chemistry, people notice patterns, sleep there, wake up sick, avoid it. Then, over generations, avoid it becomes the gods fought there. The instruction stays even if the reason shifts. You walk toward the stained rocks, not to camp, just to look. As you approach, the wind feels oddly still, as if the ridge is holding its breath. The stones are slick in places, and the color is more vivid than the surrounding gray. You feel a faint metallic taste in your mouth, which could be imagination, but it makes you step back anyway. Humans have instincts for a reason. Even if we do not always listen, what if the story is pointing at something else? What if earth damaged is sometimes a shorthand for localized danger? Places where the ground is unstable, the water bitter, the air heavy. In a world without modern hazard labels, myth is your warning sign. You return to the outpost and watch a caravan depart. The guards lift the gate. The pack animals shuffle forward. The administrator finishes a line on his tablet and blows gently to clear clay dust from the surface. A tiny gesture that feels oddly intimate. Life continues. And control continues with it. Now, bring in the cinematic possibility. Softly, what if people living near these ridges see strange lights at night? Reflections of distant campfires, meteors, or atmospheric effects, and interpret them as remnants of divine conflict. What if rumbling from shifting rock sounds like distant thunder and gets folded into war imagery? This is imagined, and you keep it framed as possibility, not certainty. You step onto the path again, moving through the pass with a calm pace. Below, the plain stretches, soft and wide. the river's presence implied, rather than seen. The hills behind you feel guarded, as if they keep their secrets out of habit. And you carry a quiet understanding that forbidden does not always mean supernatural. It can mean controlled. It can mean dangerous. It can mean sacred. It can mean all three at once, braided together until no single explanation fully untangles it. You enter a landscape that looks calm from a distance, but up close it carries a quiet warning, the kind that does not shout, only persists. The fields here are flatter, more intensively worked, and the canal lines cut the ground like careful stitches. Yet something feels off. The air has a dry edge. The plants are thinner. The soil, in places, looks pale and crusted, like it is wearing a salt mask. Most historians agree that southern Mesopotamian agriculture depends on irrigation, and the evidence we do have points to long-term challenges like salinization, canal maintenance burdens, and shifting productivity between regions over time. This is documented, mainstream, and it is the kind of slow pressure that can change everything without giving you a single dramatic moment to point at. You walk along a canal bank where the water runs shallow. The surface is slow and greenish, and small insects skate across it, making tiny V shapes. A maintenance crew works nearby, scraping silt, patching a breach with mud and reeds. Their hands are coated. Their faces are resigned. They are fighting an enemy that never sleeps. Sediment. A man in charge wipes sweat from his brow and mutters about how the canal used to run deeper. He gestures toward a distant gate and complains that upstream decisions have reduced flow. Most historians agree that managing irrigation involves cooperation and often conflict, because water is not only a resource, it is status. The evidence we do have points to communities organizing labor and authority around canal systems. One interpretation is that mythic language about curses and divine punishment can encode this kind of infrastructure stress. If the system begins to fail, people search for a reason that feels larger than clogged channels. They may say the gods turned their faces. They may say the Anunnaki argued over destinies. It is possible that what looks like cosmic drama is, in part, a way of talking about human mismanagement, political rivalry, and the sheer grind of maintaining a fragile landscape. You follow a footpath to a granary building. It is long and low, with vents near the top. An official stands at the entrance with a tablet, recording deliveries. Farmers arrive with sacks, but the sacks look smaller than you would expect. The official's expression is polite, but his eyes have the tired look of someone who has seen numbers decline and is not allowed to say, "This is bad," out loud. Most historians agree that administrative systems record rations and deliveries, and the evidence we do have points to bureaucracies that can reveal stress through changing patterns. Lower yields, shifting labor demands. This is still solid ground. Inside the granary, the smell of grain is warm and dusty. You hear mice in the walls, tiny criminals in a world where every kernel matters. Someone jokes that the mice are the most successful citizens because they pay no tax. The joke lands, then fades, because humor is a candle and scarcity is wind. Now you step outside and look across the fields. A line of palms marks a canal, but the palms are sparse. In the distance, you see a patch of ground that is abandoned. No crops, no workers, just pale crust and weeds. A farmer tells you that nothing grows there anymore unless the floods come strong enough to wash the salts away. He says the land feels bitter. Archaeology suggests that soil salinity can reduce the productivity of wheat and push farmers toward more salt-tolerant crops like barley. Most historians agree that such shifts can have large social consequences over time. You do not need a sudden explosion for a society to struggle. Sometimes the struggle is a long, quiet slide, A careful reading might suggest that ancient desolation imagery can reflect exactly this. When a text says the land became white, or dusty, or cursed, a more cautious explanation could be that people are describing visible changes in soil and yield. The myth gives it emotional shape. The field supplies the raw data. Still, the mystery element creeps in because humans love a single culprit. A popular rumor claims that a great war of the gods scorched fields, salted the earth, and left certain regions permanently damaged. This isn't widely accepted, and it often ignores the complex, gradual processes that archaeology and environmental studies suggest. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it can still be useful as a storytelling lens, because it captures how catastrophic gradual decline can feel to those living through it. When your harvest shrinks year after year, it feels like something attacked you, even if the attacker is salt and sediment. You walk into a small meeting space where elders sit on mats. A lamp burns. A jar of water sits in the center. The elders argue in low voices about what to do. One proposes digging a new canal branch. Another says the labor is too much. Another suggests moving fields northward. Another insists the gods must be appeased first. Most historians agree that community decision-making exists in various forms, and the evidence we do have points to both centralized authority and local negotiation. You can feel the tension of trying to solve a technical problem with limited tools and competing interests. One interpretation is that divine war narratives become especially tempting here. If you cannot fix the canal easily, you can at least perform a ritual. If you cannot control salinity, you can at least explain it as a divine verdict, which gives you a script for response. Offerings, prayers, purity rituals, maybe a festival to restore balance. The elders send a runner to a shrine at the edge of the fields. You follow. The shrine is simple, a low platform with a small statue, weathered but cared for. Someone has placed fresh reeds and a bowl of grain. The priest lights incense and begins a chant that speaks of restoring harmony between heaven and earth. Historians still argue whether environmental decline in parts of southern Mesopotamia is best seen as the primary driver of social change or as one factor among many, including political conflict, economic shifts, and external pressures. Now the chant grows more vivid. The priest speaks of a time when the great ones contended, when the earth drank bitterness, when the winds carried dust like a veil. You can hear the poetry pulling the technical problem into myth. It is not necessarily deception. It is translation. People translate slow changes into a language that fits their worldview. A fringe idea proposes that some ancient cursed traditions might reflect memories of sudden disasters, like severe drought sequences or flood failures, intensified by war and migration, then mythologized into a single divine conflict. This theory isn't widely accepted in a literal one-event sense, but the general notion that multiple crises can become one story is very plausible. Human memory loves compression. You step away from the shrine and walk toward a settlement where houses are closer together, as if people have begun clustering for security. You notice more repairs on walls, more patched roofs, more reused bricks. People do not throw things away here. They recycle before recycling is cool. A woman is boiling something that smells like onions and grain, stretching a meal into something bigger. She looks up and offers you a bowl. You accept, because refusing food in a struggling community would be rude, and also because your brain is like, yes, please. Soup is the universal peace treaty. The soup is thin but comforting. You taste salt in it, faint but present, and you wonder if the water carries that same bitterness. You think about how the earth's slow damage enters the body, not as a dramatic wound, but as a daily flavor. Now the cinematic possibility arrives. soft and careful. What if a storyteller, centuries later, wants to explain why certain lands became less fruitful? He might say the Anunnaki fought and the earth was harmed, because that image carries the weight of loss better than any chart. What if listeners repeat it, not because it is literally verified, but because it feels emotionally true? You walk through the settlement's edge and see a line of people leaving with bundles, moving toward a better watered area. Migration is not always a grand exodus. Sometimes it is just a family deciding they cannot keep fighting the same field. Most historians agree that population shifts occur across Mesopotamian history, influenced by environment, politics, and opportunity. The evidence we do have points to movement as a constant undercurrent. You watch the departing line and feel the quiet ache of it. No screaming, no collapse, just footsteps. And in that calm ache, you understand how a myth of Earth damaged by war could arise. Not because a single blast scorched the planet, but because the lived experience of gradual decline, argument, and relocation feels like the aftermath of a conflict you did not choose. The Earth itself becomes the battlefield, not for spectacle, but for survival. You arrive at a place where time feels stacked, not in neat layers like a cake, but in jagged piles like someone kept rebuilding the same dream with whatever bricks were left. The city here is larger, more formal, with broader streets and buildings that look recently repaired, as if someone is trying very hard to make the present look stable. The air smells of plaster, smoke, and a faint sour note from crowded living. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian societies experience cycles of growth, conflict, consolidation, and decline, and that later retellings of earlier myths often reshape older motifs to match new political realities. The evidence we do have points to stories traveling across centuries, changing outfits as they go. You walk into a hall where officials sit on benches, and the mood is tense in a quiet way. This is not a battlefield. This is where decisions happen that can create battlefields. A man stands before the group holding a tablet, reading aloud. It sounds like a proclamation, a statement of legitimacy. He names gods as witnesses. He invokes a divine council. He describes his ruler as chosen. Most historians agree that rulers use religious language to justify authority, and that state propaganda can be embedded in inscriptions, hymns, and public ritual. That is the documented anchor, solid enough to rest on. Then comes the part that feels like story, even when it is politics. The proclamation describes a threat, a rival, a chaos force. It implies that the ruler's enemies are not simply opponents, but disruptors of cosmic order. And it hints at consequences that sound almost like the land itself will suffer if the wrong side wins. One interpretation is that Anunnaki war language may be intensified in periods when leaders want to frame their conflicts as cosmic necessity. A careful reading might suggest that older myths about divine struggle are reused to make current wars feel inevitable and righteous. If the gods are on your side, then your taxes are not taxes. They are offerings. Your conscription is not conscription. It is sacred duty. You step outside the hall and into a public square where people gather. A herald speaks. Drums beat. The crowd murmurs. Some faces look excited. Some look worried. Most look like they are calculating how many days of labor this will cost them. A scribe stands nearby, writing quickly, pressing marks into a fresh tablet. He is capturing the official version of events, the version that will be repeated. The evidence we do have points to scribes as both record keepers and creators of narrative authority. Most historians agree that written texts can reflect elite perspectives. Even when they preserve broader cultural ideas, you drift toward a temple where priests are preparing for a ceremony. They carry statues on poles, moving them with slow, choreographed steps. The statues are heavy, and the carrier's muscles tremble. People throw flowers or bits of grain. The air fills with incense and chanting. The ceremony has an electric seriousness, as if everyone believes that if they perform this correctly, the world will hold together. One interpretation is that ritual becomes more intense when societies feel fragile. If the land is stressed, if politics are tense, if migration is rising. Ceremonies can serve as glue, and in that glue, the language of divine conflict can become sharper. The gods are not merely distant patrons, they are active judges. They are the council that decides whether a city thrives. Historians still argue whether the most dramatic final war style narratives emerge primarily from deep mythic tradition or from later political needs that reshape earlier stories into more apocalyptic-sounding versions. Now the mystery element comes in, carefully framed. A popular rumor claims that there was once a singular, decisive, final war among the Anunnaki that damaged the Earth so profoundly it altered human history. This is not broadly accepted as a historical event. Much of it comes from modern synthesis, selective readings, and imaginative retellings. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a way to explore why people keep returning to the image of a final rupture. A moment when everything changes. You walk through a library-like space within the temple complex, a room lined with shelves of tablets. The smell is dry and faintly chalky. The tablets are stacked in baskets or laid in rows. Some are administrative, some are literary, some are omen texts. You feel the weight of institutional memory. A priest points to a set of tablets and tells you they contain ancient stories, copied and recopied. Copying is not just preservation, it is interpretation. Each time a scribe copies, he may standardize language, harmonize contradictions, or adjust emphasis to fit current beliefs. That does not mean he is falsifying. It means he is participating in tradition. One interpretation is that as empires rise and fall, stories about divine conflict can shift from local disputes to cosmic dramas. A city-state myth becomes an empire myth. An argument among gods becomes a war of worlds. The Anunnaki, as a label for high divine authority, may become more useful as a narrative device when you want to speak about destiny on a grand scale. You pick up a tablet, carefully in your imagination, and trace the wedge marks with your eyes. The text describes a council scene. Gods speak, decisions are made, consequences follow on earth. The style is formal, like a courtroom transcript, except the judges are immortal. Most historians agree that divine council motifs appear in Mesopotamian literature, though details and names vary across texts and periods. The evidence we do have points to a worldview where fate is debated and assigned. Now the cinematic mist returns. What if the damage language is a memory of many disruptions stitched into one? A drought, a flood, a war, a migration, a strange sky event, a political collapse. When these pile up, the mind looks for a single narrative to carry them. The idea of a divine war provides that container. It says, the world cracked because the highest powers contended. A fringe idea proposes that some ancient descriptions of radiance and desolation might be read as hints of extraordinary technology or catastrophic energy. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it often lacks clear textual and archaeological support. To be clear, this is debated. Still, as an imagined possibility, it creates a particular chill. The thought that the ancients saw something they could only describe in religious terms. You walk out of the tablet room and into a courtyard where a ritual is underway. A substitute figure, perhaps a symbolic stand-in for the king, is being blessed. The priest says the ritual will divert danger. The crowd watches with hope. Most historians agree that rituals aimed at averting ominous predictions exist in Mesopotamian traditions, especially in relation to celestial omens and royal risk. The evidence we do have points to elaborate methods of managing fear through ceremony. You watch the substitute figure and think about how societies handle uncertainty. They build rituals, they build stories, they build institutions, they build explanations. Then you notice something in the corner of the courtyard. An older woman sitting alone, holding a small figurine in her palm. She's not watching the grand ritual. She is whispering her own private words. That is another kind of truth. People can believe in cosmic wars and still worry about their child's fever more than the king's omen. A more cautious explanation could be that the damage described in these stories is not a single event, but a poetic account of repeated instability. The earth is damaged when crops fail. The earth is damaged when soldiers trample fields. The earth is damaged when canals clog. The earth is damaged when people leave. The gods in the story reflect the feeling that these things are beyond individual control. You leave the courtyard and walk along a wall where a relief shows a ruler receiving symbols of authority from a god. The ruler's posture is confident. The god is larger, the message is clear. Power is granted from above. Most historians agree that such imagery reinforces legitimacy and hierarchy. Now, the question that lingers in your mind is not, did the Anunnaki literally fight? The more interesting question is, why does the story keep being told as war? Why does war feel like the right metaphor for environmental strain and political struggle? What if the story is pointing at something else? What if it is warning that when leadership becomes arrogant, when resources are strained, when communities fracture, the world feels damaged? Not because the planet is physically broken, but because the system that makes life workable is cracking. You walk through a street where people sell bread and oil. You hear a lullaby from a doorway. You smell smoke from a kiln. The city is alive, even in tension, and you sense how stories can be both comfort and control. A way to explain hardship, a way to justify power, a way to keep people moving in the same direction. You pause at a small altar at a street corner. Someone has left a bit of fruit. Someone has left a tiny clay animal. Someone has left a whisper, as if whispers can be stored like grain. And you carry the thought that the final war idea may be less about a literal battlefield in the sky, and more about the human need to name a turning point. To say, this is when things changed. This is when the earth felt harmed. This is when the old order broke. You step into dawn that is so gentle it feels rehearsed. A pale light spreading across the plain as if the world is trying to convince you it has always been calm. The air is cool and slightly sweet, carrying the scent of damp reeds and last night's smoke. A thin mist hangs over low ground, and the river, somewhere nearby, murmurs like a tired storyteller who refuses to fully stop talking. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian myths, rituals, and administrative records all show people wrestling with nature, power, and uncertainty. And the evidence we do have points to a society that explains stress through both practical action and sacred narrative. You walk toward a small work site where men and women gather around baskets of clay, reeds, and tools. They are rebuilding a canal wall. The breach is not huge, but it matters. Water pushes at the weak spot with quiet insistence. The workers move with practiced efficiency, packing mud, laying reeds, pressing bricks into place. It is not heroic in the way songs like to describe, but it is heroic in the way survival actually works. One interpretation is that this is what repairing the damaged earth looks like in real life. Not a single grand fix, not a dramatic victory, just hands in mud, again and again, If you want to translate the Anunnaki war idea into something grounded, you can see it as a mythic mirror held up to repeated cycles of strain, floods that break embankments, salts that weaken fields, rivalries that disrupt trade, omens that stir anxiety. The myth says, the great ones fought. The lived reality says, the world is fragile and you have to keep patching it. A priest arrives, not to stop the work, but to bless it. He sprinkles water and speaks words asking for steadiness. The workers nod and keep moving. Most historians agree that ritual and labor often coexist in Mesopotamian life, and the evidence we do have points to religious practice woven into daily tasks rather than isolated from them. The priest's words mention balance between heaven and earth. He does not describe a literal sky battlefield in technical detail. He speaks in symbols, harmony, order, the calming of winds, the settling of waters. A careful reading might suggest that even when divine conflict is invoked, the purpose is often to restore stability, not to celebrate destruction. You step away from the canal wall and follow a footpath into a grove of palms. The fronds rustle, and sunlight flickers through them like slow blinking. In the shade, you find a small cluster of stones arranged in a circle. In the center is a shallow depression where offerings have been placed. A few grains, a small piece of bread, a bead. This is not the grand stage of kings. This is private devotion. A more cautious explanation could be that the strongest evidence for earth damage in these worlds is the evidence of stress people can see and feel, the bitter soil, the unpredictable water, the ruins rebuilt, the anxious ceremonies, the shifting populations. None of that requires a literal Anunnaki war as a historical event. But the myth of a war can still be meaningful as a cultural interpretation, a way of naming the experience of living under forces that seem larger than any individual. Historians still argue whether myth should be read primarily as symbolic storytelling, as encoded social commentary, or as a layered memory that sometimes preserves echoes of real disasters in stylized form. You keep walking until you reach a low rise where the ground changes texture. The soil is darker here, richer. You see small plants pushing through, stubborn green points. A farmer is crouched, inspecting them. He looks up and smiles with the cautious relief of someone who has seen too many bad seasons to trust a good sign too quickly. He tells you, in plain words, that the land can recover in patches. He says some fields need rest, some need better water flow, some need the salts washed out. He is not speaking in myth, he is speaking in experience. Most historians agree that farmers develop practical strategies, crop choices, field rotation practices where possible, and labor organization to adapt to conditions. The evidence we do have points to human ingenuity operating inside limits. Now the mystery element can arrive, but it must arrive softly and honestly. A fringe idea proposes that certain ancient descriptions of burning, radiance, or dead land might reflect an extraordinary event that people could not explain, and that later storytellers framed as divine conflict. This theory isn't widely accepted, and specific claims often outpace evidence. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a gentle what if in the night. What if there were rare moments when the sky looked wrong, when the horizon glowed strangely, when the wind carried unfamiliar dust, when people felt the world had been struck? You look up at the dawn sky. It is pale blue now, soft and innocent, yet you can imagine how quickly it can change. A sudden storm, a strange halo, an eclipse, a meteor, a red sunset from distant haze. Even without exotic explanations, the sky can perform in ways that feel supernatural. You walk into a small village where children chase each other with sticks, pretending they are warriors. Their game is lively and loud. and one child declares himself king of the universe, which is adorable until you remember grown men have said similar things with less charm. The children's pretend battles are not about gods. They are about energy and imitation. Still, the language of war slips naturally into play, because conflict is one of the easiest stories to understand. One interpretation is that when cultures talk about wars of the gods, they may be using the most familiar dramatic structure available. Conflict, stakes, winners, losers. It is the skeleton that can carry many kinds of meaning, from weather disasters to political struggles to moral lessons. You pass a small workshop where a potter shapes clay on a wheel. The clay spins, and the pot rises like a calm miracle. The potter's hands are steady. He is making something that will hold water, grain, soup, life. It is the opposite of damage. It is containment, order, usefulness. Most historians agree that crafts and specialized labor are central to urban economies, and the evidence we do have points to skilled production as a hallmark of these societies. A woman nearby is pressing a seal into a lump of clay on a jar stopper. The seal leaves an image, a mark of ownership and accountability. This small act connects to the biggest themes: control, trust, legitimacy. The earth is not only damaged, it is also constantly being organized. Now, you let the whole idea of Earth damaged by the Anunnaki war settle into a balanced shape in your mind. Documented environmental pressures, floods, salinity, canal struggles, conflict among city-states, and a rich tradition of myth and ritual. Interpreted, the idea that divine war language may encode political rivalry, social anxiety, and the feeling of systemic fragility. Imagined, the cinematic possibility that rare sky events or unusual disasters could have fed the most vivid images of burning heavens and wounded land. And you do not have to force it into one answer. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. You walk to the edge of the village where a small shrine stands. The shrine statue is worn smooth in places where many hands have touched it, leaving their worry like fingerprints. You place your palm near it without pressing, respectful. You listen to the quiet. In the distance, you see a stretch of pale ground, a place where plants do not grow well. The village avoids it. Children do not play there. Adults do not linger. Maybe it is salt. Maybe it is poor drainage. Maybe it is superstition. A more cautious explanation could be any of these. But in the village's story, it is a scar, and scars are always surrounded by narrative. You turn and begin to walk away from the shrine, letting the morning light warm your face. Now the wind down begins, slow and soft, the way you ease a door closed without a click. You let your steps become lighter, as if the ground is a sleeping animal and you do not want to wake it. The air is calm, and the sounds of the village blur into a gentle texture. Distant voices, a soft clatter of pottery, a bird calling once, then again. You breathe in, and the breath feels like it reaches deeper, like it is smoothing out the last sharp edges of curiosity. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. Tonight, you have kept them separate, like stones laid in a careful path across a shallow stream. You have walked on the solid ones, and you have allowed the mist to drift around your ankles without pretending it is the ground. That is a safe way to carry mystery. Not as a weapon, not as a panic, but as a quiet companion to wonder. You look up one last time. The sky is bright now, almost ordinary. Yet you know, in the calm way you know the ocean is still deep even when the surface is smooth, that the human mind will always look for meaning in what changes above and below. When fields fail, when rivers rise, When leaders argue, when the night sky darkens unexpectedly, people reach for stories that can hold the feeling. They name councils, they name wars, they name the great ones. They say the earth was damaged because it feels true in the body, even when the exact mechanics remain uncertain. And then you let the uncertainty become soothing rather than sharp. You let it remind you that you do not have to solve every puzzle tonight. You can simply notice that people long ago were not so different. They worked, they worried, they laughed at goats, they watched the sky. They tried to keep their home standing. They told stories big enough to match their fear and gentle enough to carry their hope. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders soften. The plain stretches out in your mind, quiet and endless. And the river's murmur becomes the steady hush of sleep itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.